First of all, Mayor, there were some protests yesterday in Seattle that involved some destruction of property, some windows blown out on a couple of different precincts. From where you sit, how do you view those protests last night?
So I think it's really important to always reiterate how important protests are and the right to challenge government. And the protest against ICE is a righteous cause. We've seen this administration really attack our communities, our immigrant and refugee communities here in Seattle. And we've done a lot, and I stand with them on raising that concerns. Unfortunately, after that protest, a number of other people, relatively fewer individuals, came and had, I think, a very different intent in place and really left a trail of property destruction, vandalism in downtown Seattle and Capitol Hill, hitting a number of businesses. In one instance, throwing a lit thing in a business where there's housing above it, and that is really unfortunate. That is not, in my view, peaceful protest in any way. It distracts from the message, and that the SPD is investigating those cases and will investigate them like we do any activities like that.
Councilmember Herbold said this morning during the council briefing she is concerned that the Trump administration would use those scenes to enact a Portland-style response. Do you share that?
We've been working very hard to avoid just that. Pete Holmes and I, weeks ago, heard that the Trump administration wanted to, quote, come into Seattle. We told them no, and we told them that we would sue to stop them. They backed down at that point. Last week, as was reported nationally, the president went on national television and said that they were going to send troops or federal forces into Seattle, and that they warned us they were going to do that. That never happened, but I remain very concerned that they would take those actions. And I think that this kind of behavior, in many ways, is the type of behavior that precipitates their justification for doing so. We've seen that in Portland. What's happening in Portland should worry every American. That is not the role for federal forces in a city. We need to allow local officials to handle their local situations. There's a lot we need help from the federal government on. We need COVID testing. We need people to get rent relief. We need a whole range of things to get us through this economic downturn. What we don't need are federal agents in full combat gear doing what they're doing in Portland.
Any concern that the people who caused the destruction were not the people who were involved in the ICE demonstration earlier in the day?
I do. I think that it really, if you watch the video from place to place, the people causing that destruction clearly came wanting to do that. They were dressed to do it. They had the implements to do it. They were, most people when they go to protest are not, camouflaged head to toe, wearing helmets and goggles and carrying baseball bats or inflammatory devices. So I really want to say every way I can, protests are part of the American cherished right to challenge government. And there are different ways people can protest, but just causing property destruction does not advance those First Amendment rights. You do not have a First Amendment right to cause property damage or to throw incendiary devices into a business.
So how do you balance what happened yesterday with the ongoing conversation that you're directly involved in, which is the idea of defunding the police, cutting the funding for the police at a time when we see something like that happen?
I think it two things. One is we can't get too distracted by so many events that we don't focus on the really important message that we hear since the murder of George Floyd. And that is we need to do all we can to really dismantle systemic racism in all of our institutions and to invest in our communities at a level that will make them more healthy and more self-sufficient, and so that they don't have to call 911 as often. So my focus is really going to be on continuing to listen to and working with community to see how do we reimagine policing so that when you need a police officer and you call 911, you get one immediately. But if you need some other kind of help, that kind of help can get dispatched. You cannot do that overnight. That is going to take a thoughtful process and the ability to build up that other kind of response, which we don't have in Seattle or in any city in America right now.
So I asked you a few times on Friday what you were going to do with the payroll tax, the JumpStart Seattle tax. You said something was coming later in the afternoon. It did come later in the afternoon. You decided not to veto, but not to sign the legislation. Why go that route?
So there's obviously the measure passed with enough votes that they would override our veto, my veto, and it would become law. I've talked to council members and made it very clear. In reality, this bill doesn't go into effect until 2022 when we start collecting the monies. That gives us some time for everybody to actually come together and try to collaborate on a path forward so that we can put into place. I believe in progressive taxes. I supported a payroll tax at the regional level, but a city-only tax could put Seattle at a huge disadvantage at a time that we will have some of the greatest economic downturn ever in our city. I want to work with council and have reached out to council to see in the coming weeks and months, we can, through the budget process, get a better system in place. That's normally how we would do it. They pushed this through, I think, without enough thought and without enough public participation. But I'm still willing to work with them over the coming weeks to see if there's a way we can get the revenues we think we need, but do it in a way that we're not going to really hamper our city's ability to come out of this economic crisis.
And they also have decided to take the money, all the money that's in the emergency fund, well over $50 million, saying this is the time when you use a city emergency fund in a crisis like the multiple crises that we're in right now. You would say what to that?
So we are in multiple crises right now, and we've been working really hard with our federal delegation, with the state, and with our local resources to get as much direct help as we can to the people who need it. And we've done it not just through government, but by collaboration with the Seattle Foundation and United Way, all in Washington and all in Seattle. We need to really assess where the greatest need is. When you have a rainy day fund, you have to realize it's not going to quit raining. COVID is here, and it's here probably in through next year. Our largest employers have announced their employees will not return to their brick and mortar locations in downtown Seattle this calendar year. We have many, many more months of this, and we have next year as well. So we need to make sure that we have funds adequate to shelter some of the emergency we're going to continue to have. I also want to say that I've talked to the council members. I've urged them, at least on this piece, let's wait. We need to know more about where we need to spend those funds and who's already covering those gaps. Congress will be acting within weeks. We're going to get a city forecast telling us how big the hole is for next year. So we need to do that in order to do the best we can for the people of Seattle, the people who have an emergency needs, and the people who are relying on city services.
So last question, I mean, what is the risk to using the emergency fund now? I mean, if God forbid something horrible happened in the city of Seattle between now and the end of the year, I mean, what's the risk?
It's a significant risk. We would be spending it down, not to zero, but close. They're depending on which version passes. It could be $85 to $90 million we won't have for emergencies the rest of this year and next year. And this is a year when emergencies just seem to keep piling up, from the West Seattle Bridge to COVID to our economic downturn. I think we really have to be thinking not just immediate needs, which are great, but we've done a lot to address those immediate needs. We need to also make sure that we have the best information and can address those needs as they come. And again, there is at this juncture no way to replenish those emergency funds or rainy day funds. There is the theory that they would replace them early with the payroll tax, that no one knows how many businesses will still be here, how large that tax will be, or how big the hole is going to be next year. So I think that, again, it is spending down the only cushion we have to protect us against emergencies the rest of this year and next year.